So there's different arguments as to why science and philosophy are so important. I'm going to give you just one, really, and that being that your everyday kind of intuition and everyday experience of the sense, I guess the sensory world you can call it, is very limiting. It's a very narrow band of information coming into your experience. And so when we use science, we use tools that are outside of those senses to gather information, and philosophy to model that information. So, and there's all sorts of different tools and probes and different things like this out there, but we use these methods as a type of technology to probe outside of our limited sphere of perception. So let's just say for this, well, let's talk a little bit about trigonometry. Trigonometry is a great example of how these two different worlds are so well correlated that you get to see these very interesting interactions and interplays between circles and waves and all the different wave structures that can form. But essentially, you can model that back into a wave, and it has all sorts of different applications in science and information and that sort of thing, and modeling information. So that's trigonometry. It's a well-known field. If you go to college, you'll study that. It's a little bit higher math. It's not the highest levels of math, but it's a high level of math, and it's very useful. Now let's just say that you are a one-dimensional little creature, and you go by and you see, you're like on a string. You exist on this little string. And as you go through your life and your experience, you go and see different kind of areas where it's like really bright, and then it's kind of not so bright, and it's dark. And it just kind of has these patterns, but you can't really quite see the bigger pattern because you're just this one-dimensional being. You might not even notice that there's a pattern. It's just what it is, going back and forth. Or if you stay in an area, it's very bright. If you go to another area, it's not so bright, or it's very dark, and that's your world. Well, if you look at this from a two-dimensional perspective, you can very easily see that you're dealing with an interference pattern. Okay. Now let's go back to the one-dimensional pattern, okay, or one-dimensional world. And every once in a while, you go and you see this kind of little bump on the road. Okay. And you see this bump, and then it goes away, and everything's fine again. And you come back, and it's a bump. Okay. But from a two-dimensional perspective, it's really a Fibonacci pattern. But you could never figure that out if you just go by your senses. You have to use higher functions of your mind to piece that together. Now, in a one-dimensional reality, that might be really hard to tell or how hard to understand, okay, or see that. But from a two-dimensional perspective, it's a lot easier if you survey the whole environment, and you see that's a Fibonacci pattern. But you can also extend this out into a third dimension. You get this three-dimensional, looks like a kind of a snail kind of shape, or a conch, or like a horn of certain animals have a certain type of horn like this, or even like a tornado. You have this kind of shape. So really, what it is, I've seen different models of four-dimensional, five-dimensional, six-dimensional structures, and models and things like that. I don't really understand all that stuff. Just is beyond my mind. Some people get it. That's fine. But what I want to illustrate here is that whenever we shift dimensions, go into higher dimensions, things that were not so obvious from that lower dimension become very obvious from the higher dimension. And I'm going to venture to say that spiritually speaking, you're dealing with a very, very high dimension. So things that you could never see with science, for example, become very easy to see and very clear from a spiritual perspective. Now that doesn't mean that that perspective can get diluted, it can get corrupted, and they can get false data into that way of seeing the world. But that we need to look at it from many different perspectives to get a full image of what we are dealing with when we're talking about life and all its different dynamics.